Sorry.
Okay.
Good evening. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the inaugural Nashville Next Speakers Series event with tonight's featured speaker, Mitchell Silver. My name is Alistair Newbern. I teach at the law school at Vanderbilt, and I also serve as the chair of Nashville for All of Us, and in that capacity, I am involved in the Nashville Next steering committee. Nashville for All of Us is an independent, diverse community coalition that formed in 2008 to oppose an English-only law that would have made Nashville a less hospitable community. But Nashville stood up for equity and inclusion and defeated that ordinance. And today, Nashville for All of Us continues on its mission to promote a productive, just, and welcoming Nashville for all of its residents without regard to race, gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation, disability, or wealth. I'm pleased to serve on the Nashville Next steering committee and to bring Nashville for All of Us' commitment to equity and inclusion to the Nashville Next process. In the next 25 years, the Middle Tennessee region is anticipated to grow by over 1 million people. And as our region grows in numbers, it will grow more diverse as well. By 2025, fewer families will have children and more households will be single persons. During the next 25 years, Nashville and the rest of the country will see its largest age cohort, the baby boomers, reach retirement age. And by 2020, it is anticipated that Davidson County's population will be majority people of color, with Hispanics as the largest ethnic group by 2040. These changes in Nashville's diversity will impact how we live, work, and interact as Nashvillians. And that's why I'm so pleased that demographic change and equity and inclusion are central to the Nashville Next planning effort and are the subject of this first community discussion. Let me tell you a little bit about the Nashville Next process. Nashville Next is a planning process, 2 years of planning intended to ensure Nashville's well-being and prosperity for the next 25 years. The Nashville Next planning process combines the ideas of and input of people who care about Nashville, people like you, and those of experts in a variety of areas that are important to Nashville's growth. And at the end of the Nashville Next planning process, we will have a plan that looks not only at equity, inclusion, and diversity, but also arts and culture, economic development, education, the environment, transportation, livable and healthy communities, public safety, children and youth, and more. Part of the Nashville Next process involves community visioning. And that portion of the process was kicked off last Saturday with a wonderful event at the downtown library and will continue throughout the process in other venues and through various forms of technology, and we'll talk more about that later. But tonight we launched the Nashville Next Speaker Series. The Speaker Series brings nationally recognized thought leaders to Nashville to discuss topics that are relevant to Nashville's future and to the nation's future. The speakers will challenge us with new ideas and new strategies to address some of the greatest challenges and opportunities facing our city. This evening, we are very pleased to have Mitchell Silver with us to discuss Changing Faces of America, the opportunities and challenges of 21st century demographics. Mr. Silver brings a national perspective to the topic of demographic change, equity, and inclusion. But if you are interested in a local perspective on these topics, I encourage you to go to NashvilleNext.net to read the background report on equity and inclusion that was created by Nashville for All of Us with Professor Dan Cornfield, Metro Human Relations Commission Executive Director Caroline Blackwell, and Dr. Kimberly Wish Etheridge from the Public Health Department. The report offers a diversity of voices on Nashville's future and ideas in becoming an ever more just and welcoming community for the Nashville Next planning process. Also, this conversation on demographic change, equity, and inclusion from the Nashville perspective will continue tomorrow night on News Channel 5 Plus's Open Line, when our fellow Nashvillians Renata Soto, Rimzia Suleiman, and Caroline Blackwell will discuss Mr. Silver's speech and share their thoughts on the growing diversity of Nashville. That will be from 7 to 8 p.m. on News Channel 5 Plus's Open Line show. The speaker series itself is sponsored by the Greater Nashville Association of Realtors, Regent Homes, Southern Land, and the Village Fund. And tonight's speaker is sponsored by H.G. Hill Realty. Thank you to our sponsors and their assistance in bringing these speakers and their ideas to Nashville. So just a little bit about tonight's format and how to promote your participation in this conversation tonight. After Mr. Silver speaks, he's going to take questions from the audience. When you came in, you had the opportunity to get a question card. And on that card, please write any questions that come to you as you're listening to tonight's conversation. And we'll collect them at the end of the talk and then use them in the question and answer period. And if you didn't get a card and would like one, please raise your hand and someone will bring one to you. We ask that you do silence your cellular devices during this program, but we are very committed to outreach through social media in this process. So if you hear something interesting, please text it to MindMixer at a phone number that will be displayed, or share it on Facebook or Twitter at #NashvilleNext. Now, before I introduce Mr. Silver, I'm pleased to welcome tonight's featured artists. For those of you that attended our kickoff at the Downtown Public Library, you know that throughout the Nashville Next planning process, we will be highlighting one of Nashville's distinctive qualities, our varied and talented arts community. So we're pleased to feature artists from Nashville who demonstrate how art not only entertains, but enlightens and can provide an opening into conversation about the world around us. Tonight, I'm pleased to invite Chris Clark, who is a board member of the Tennessee Women's Theater Project, to introduce their work.
A moment for stagecraft.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. So we're just honored to be a part of this. Tennessee Women's Theater Project is a very small, very ambitious nonprofit theater company. We exist because we believe that 51% of the population, the female part, should get a lot more center stage storytelling time. Because we're a nonprofit, very small and very ambitious, I want you to know about a current show. It's called Distracted, and we're at the Luby Theater on the vibrant north side of Nashville, and you can learn more. We have cards out on the table about Distracted, but we need you in our audience over there too. So, to the matter at hand. I'm standing in for the artistic director and founder of Tennessee Women's Theater Project. Her name is Mariana Clark, and she has a voice disorder that's especially difficult to get past tonight. So I'm inadvertently the voice of women's theater in Nashville. The play that we are developing now is entitled Voices of Nashville, and the idea came to Mariana, who is herself kind of an imprint of immigration in the Northeast. Her forebears are Irish and Italian and Puerto Rican. Every rung of the ladder moves up. Everyone hits the bottom rung of the ladder in an immigrant town and moves up a rung and doesn't that much appreciate the people who just joined them on the bottom rung. And then 3 rungs later, they marry each other. And I'm watching that happen in Nashville now, and it makes me so excited. When Mariana got the idea for this play, what she wanted to see was what the new Americans think of their experience in the New South from their point of view. We have 2 playwrights. Sarah Sharp and Christine Mather are here. They've been interviewing people all over the city with the help of a lot of you in the room to learn what the stories are of people who've been here a long time and people who've been here practically no time, and what they think of Nashville, what they dream for themselves in a city like ours. What you're about to hear is just the bare beginnings of a play that will be opening in October. We hope to be touring Nashville schools with this in the coming school year and to take it as far as our legs will carry us, because we think that beyond just entertainment, we think that theater has some enlightening to do for people. So let me say that what you're about to see is a composite character that's kind of the result of interviews, and there's a lot more to come. And let me welcome Carrie Pizzapia to perform a very early draft of part of Voices of Nashville. Thank you.
My first memory of this country is of getting off the plane at the Nashville airport after the first time ever on a plane for anyone in my family. I was 7. A Baptist church in Nashville had sponsored us, and the people from the church were waiting for us at the airport, along with some Kurds who had already come to the U.S. Someone from the church had brought a doll for me, the kind where the eyes roll back, and it was such a sweet gesture, but that doll just scared the heck out of me because I had never seen a doll before. When they tried to hand it to me, I screamed and hid behind my mother's back. I wouldn't have anything to do with it. We didn't have dolls in my village in Kurdistan. In our village, we played outside. We played tag. We played hide and seek. We were in the mountains. We played with nature. We went exploring. The doll story is so funny now, but then it was scary. So, lesson for all of you: if you ever pick up a refugee child at the airport, leave your dolls at home. My name is Media. I was born in 1984. My family is originally from a Kurdish region. My home in the village was actually literally on the border of Turkey and Iraq. My family had been on the run since the late 80s from the chemical genocide campaign led by Saddam and his regime. Saddam was targeting Kurdish villages across northern Iraq and using a series of chemical weapons. His regime massacred thousands and thousands of Kurds in that campaign. In 1988, things progressed from the chemical genocide to all-out civil war between the Kurds and the government at the time. My father and uncles were all freedom fighters, so my family, of course, was targeted. My first real memories are of the refugee camp in southeastern Turkey in 1990, right before the massive U.S. support in the area. We were fortunate because we weren't in one of the tent cities. We were one of the earlier families to arrive, so our family shared 3 empty rooms with 3 other families: a sleeping room, a kitchen area, and a restroom. 3 rooms with no running water and no electricity. The refugee camp was crowded and isolated, and there were many hungry days. I remember one day just sitting on the steps because I was so hungry. Not only was I hungry, but tired of eating the same thing every day. Every day my mom made rice and a type of wheat. That was all we had, and that day I really wanted a salad with cucumbers and tomatoes. And my mother said we didn't have any, so I was sitting on the steps and crying. I just didn't know why there was so little food and no salad. My uncle came to me and said, "You should be grateful you have this. There are a lot of kids here who don't even have what you have." Starvation was rampant. Fortunately for us, we were there with other relatives, and everything we had, we shared. One thing about life in the refugee camp is whatever food we have, we share with others around us. My parents did anything and everything they could to protect the kids from seeing the deaths, the starvation, the hunger, the war around us, all of that. So I have a lot of happy memories from the refugee camp. Yes, there was sadness. Yes, I saw death. Yes, I went hungry. But I remember playing with kids every day. I remember games. And there was always music. There were parties and weddings. We did what we could with what we had, but I also remember the feelings of sadness, knowing that something was wrong, but not being able to quite comprehend it. That feeling is with me to this day. We came to the U.S. in 1991. We didn't decide to come, we were chosen. Certain countries picked names. It was like a lottery. I remember getting on the bus at the airport, seeing my only aunt say goodbye to my father because her name hadn't been called yet. And I am very young, but I can see them crying outside, knowing that we might never see each other again. Not easy. My parents didn't know where we were going. They only knew it was somewhere safe. We didn't know anything about the language. We didn't know what we were going to eat or where we were going to sleep. All we knew was we wouldn't be bombed. That's it. That's the only comfort you have. When we got to Nashville, we moved into a duplex with my uncle's family. For the first several weeks, we were very lonely. We had relatives who had been in the same camp with us and had been called to Nashville the year before, but we didn't know where they were. I remember that my parents were very sad not knowing that. I don't remember how we found my relatives, but I remember the first moment we saw them. We were actually living only 5 minutes away from them, but we didn't know that. I remember everyone coming together for the first time and seeing my cousins and saying, "You're alive," and "I'm alive." These were the people I had known when I was little. These were the only people I had known. We had only been separated for a year, but for us it felt like an eternity. Because when we were separated, we didn't know if we would ever see them again. So from that moment on, we stayed together. Everything we did, we were like, we're not going on without each other. I don't ever remember experiencing intolerance when I was little. Nashville has always been very, very welcoming. I knew I was different, but I never felt out of place. It's only been in recent years that we have begun to feel very out of place and attacked for our religious beliefs. In public places, the stares and the comments are so common now that I just zone them out. Even when someone yells, "Go home, terrorist." The other day, I walked into a restroom and a mom grabbed her little girl and pulled her away from me as if she was protecting her from someone dangerous. A lot of fear has come from 9/11, but also I think folks are realizing that the communities and the neighborhoods they once knew are no longer the same. There's people speaking differently and looking different and eating different types of food, and change is scary. So now there's a lot of hostile political rhetoric, which has fueled a lot of hate and misinformation. There's a new anti-Muslim, anti-foreign, anti-immigrant movement in state politics. When you give misinformation to someone who's afraid, it leads to hate. And that's what we're seeing with attacks on immigrants and mosques and on religious institutions. I work for an advocacy organization. My role specifically is to be a Muslim face at the state capitol. I'm a registered lobbyist, and I meet with elected officials on a regular basis about politics that affect the Muslim community. But we don't just deal with Muslim-specific issues. We deal with issues of education, civil rights, civil liberties. We try to be catalysts for positive change. The first time I met this one legislator, he was very abrasive, very closed off, and he made some very hateful, very racist comments like, Muslims are terrorists who will implement Sharia. Immigrants are here to take over. They don't want to learn English, etc. So the first few meetings were very difficult for both of us. But I kept meeting with him. And we started talking on a more personal level. We started sharing stories. I found out that when his mother first came to Tennessee, she was persecuted for being Catholic. We talked about that, and I told him about my experiences. In this way, he was eventually able to relate to me and to put a human face on the issue. This elected official is now one of our key allies. This sort of change is possible when we share our stories with one another. I think people just need to get to know us. No matter how different we all are, I think that Once you give people across the state access to people, real people with real stories, they'll give everyone that Southern hospitality that Tennesseans gave me and my family. And this is now my home. There is no go back to your country. This is my country. I'm going to raise my kids here someday, God willing. I'm a part of this community. My roots are here, and they will always be here. Even though my work centers around the Muslim community, whenever I see an injustice, whether it's an injustice against my community or any other community, I want everyone to know that I'll be there. I'll be fighting for the rights of all. It has nothing to do with your religion, your background, your ethnicity. If you're facing an injustice, you'll see me there. Because I know how it feels to be singled out, to be targeted, hated. More importantly, I know what it feels like to be loved and accepted. I'm here because Tennesseans believed in me and said, we're going to help her, and we're going to guide her, and we're going to support her. We're going to see her thrive. That's why I'm here. Thank you.
Thank you so much to the Tennessee Women's Theater Project for providing such a vivid example of what we're here to talk about tonight. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Mitchell Silver. Mitchell Silver is the Chief Planning and Economic Development Officer in the city of Raleigh, North Carolina. He is an award-winning planner with more than 25 years of planning experience and is nationally recognized for his leadership in the profession and his contributions to contemporary planning issues. Before coming to Raleigh in 2005, he worked as a policy and planning director in New York City and was a principal in the New York City-based planning firm, a town manager in New Jersey, a deputy planning director in Washington, D.C., and he taught graduate planning courses at Hunter College, Brooklyn College, the Pratt Institute, and at North Carolina State University. He is known by his colleagues as a creative thinker, a problem solver, and leader. He's been at the center of cutting-edge trends, innovative solutions, and visionary plans. As Raleigh's planning director, he led a comprehensive plan update process to create a vibrant city with a modern transit system, great streets, and robust neighborhoods. He's now overseeing a rewrite of the city's development code. He was a contributing editor and author of the International City-County Management Association's book, Local Planning, Contemporary Principles and Practice, which was released in February 2009. And his work and commentary has been featured in Time.com, the New York Times, Planning Magazine, the Triangle Business Journal, Crane's Business Journal, and on NPR. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Silver.
Whoa, we're going forwards already.
Okay,
Go back.
you got a sneak peek.
There you go.
Well, first, thank you for that wonderful presentation. It was very moving, and that's something I'm glad that's being recorded because more people have to hear that story. It was absolutely beautiful. First, let me thank you for inviting me here. It's certainly a pleasure, and I have to commend this community and this region for actually placing diversity as one of the foundations for your planning effort. I get to travel the country. I've been to almost every state except 4, and I have to say that the effort that you're taking is quite unique. And so I have to commend you for taking this on. We did this in Raleigh, and you'll see that it's paid really huge dividends for us. I also want to thank the leadership of Mayor Dean and all of the other key sponsors, the Chamber of Commerce, the Land Trust of Tennessee, and also Nashville for All of Us. This is an important conversation to have in this community. Very quickly about the American Planning Association. It's an organization that has 40,000 members. We have members in 90 countries. And the past chair of the Student Representative Council, Andrea Barber, is here in the room. I don't want to embarrass you, Andrea, but I got to know her on our board of directors, so I was very pleased to see Andrea here. But I also want to let you know that the leadership you have here in planning, if you don't know this, Rick Bernhardt is known as one of the outstanding planning directors in the United States. So please give him and his staff a round of applause. And I'm not saying that because I'm here. I really mean that sincerely. Rick is doing a fantastic job. Well, let me talk to you now because I'm here to talk about the issue of race. I've been doing this for a number of years, about 20 years, but put together this presentation about 4 years ago. I have to tell you, when I started this presentation back in 2008, it was difficult, and I can tell you, there were times when I shared this information that people literally walked out the room as if the numbers were going to change, but they left because they couldn't handle it. But now I think that in recent elections, people are realizing that this is an issue our country has to deal with. I'm going to be very blunt. I'm from New York, so I can't help it. But just to know my background, I'm a child of mixed race. My father, who was white and Jewish, his family migrated here from Germany. And my mother, black and Catholic, her family migrated here from Haiti. So if you put a white German Jew and a Haitian Catholic together, what do you get? A born-again, mixed-race Christian who was right here before you. What's great is I get along with myself totally well. The New Testament side gets along with the Old Testament side. There's no inner turmoil whatsoever. So diversity truly works. I live it every day. I get along with myself. But more importantly, when I grew up, there were all sorts of terms for mixed-race individuals. When I was young, I was called zebra, half-breed, mutt, other, when you check the application. But it wasn't until the 1990s when I was so grateful when the Halle Berrys and Alicia Keys hit the scene, they had a new term for mixed-race children, and it was called exotic. So I am your exotic president of the American Planning Association. All right, so let's get into the presentation. I like to set the context for planning because most people don't understand what planning is all about. And planning is primarily a response to growth and change. And in our country, we have a history of change. And I don't know if you knew this, but back in the 19th century, there were only 5 million people in our country with an urbanized population of roughly 6%. And then because of the immigration, primarily from Europe, in the late 19th century and early 20th century, our population swelled to 76 million. By the 21st century, we're around a little over 300 million today, and you can see where we're headed as a country. This is a change that as planners and as policymakers and elected officials that we have to deal with. Different regions will be affected differently, and that is why we have to plan. And believe me, there are places in this country that do not want to plan. So what does this mean for us? Over the next 50 years, we have to figure out where to accommodate 124 million people in the United States. That's what's coming our way. So people say, I don't want to grow. You might as well say you don't want it to rain. These people are coming because at least a third of this number are just people having children. So this is the growth we're expected in this country. We'll also need 40 to 50 million housing units to accommodate this population. And believe it or not, the region in this country that's going to see the most growth is the South, more so than the West. And so these are some of the changes we're going to have to experience. And you heard the number. You're expected 1 million of that number to be here over the next 20 years in the Nashville metro region. So the question is, what will the next generation of development look like and communities look like? What will it look like? And that's part of the conversation you're having as your NashvilleNext. But I like to differentiate the kind of tale of two centuries, where in the 20th century, we saw cities come of age. New York, Boston, Philadelphia. Those were Rust Belt cities, and for the most part, those cities are shrinking. What we see happening in the South, where that challenge was urbanization, our challenge in the 21st century is suburbanization. We have cities that aren't growing up, but growing out. And that is now the challenge that we're dealing with in the 21st century. So there are two different challenges. If you look at the cities of the 21st century coming of age, They're a lot lower density, and they're very, very different. And when I talk about this term urbanized or urban, it means different things to different people. The census gave you a definition, and basically both those pictures are considered urban, both of them. One is on the edge of our city, Raleigh, but it's part of our city, and it's considered urban as well as downtown Houston. So the census said urbanized areas are 50,000 or more, or an urban cluster between 2,500 and 50,000 people. The census considers that urban. How many people live in a town of about 5,000 who grew up in a town of 5,000? Anybody here in the room, would you consider that urban? No, you wouldn't. And so as I travel the country and talk about urban, people are associating the popular culture of urban. In fact, here's the map of all the urban clusters and urbanized areas in the United States. No surprise, it's clustered in the Northeast, in the South, Midwest, and a little bit out West. And in fact, when I travel to one of the states out in the West to say, wow, I'm so excited, you actually have urbanized clusters in your city. And the minute I finished my presentation, a gentleman got up and said, ladies and gentlemen, we have to work to get those green dots off of our map. And I was like, what are you going to do? Take a nuclear missile and take the town out? But in the West, to be considered urban was some kind of disease or cancer we had to get rid of. And so when we talk about planning, we have to understand that urban means different things to different people because it is a bit of a challenge. So when we talk about planning and what has happened over time, it has about a 150-year history. Why am I showing you this chart? Well, at the very beginning, we saw people moving from the country to the city. It was urbanizing very rapidly. It was the Industrial Revolution. People were dying and getting sick because there wasn't clean water. There wasn't decent housing. And so that is why the profession started way back in the late part of the 19th century. But the reason why I show you this chart is that the profession continually evolves and changes. Every period in American history, there is some new challenge that forces us to respond very differently. And the planning profession evolves to change with those times. And if you look at the period we're coming out of sustainability and new urbanism and smart growth, even though they're going to be around for a while, we're now at the point since the recession where everybody's asking the question, what's next? Where do we go from here? What are we going to do because things are changing in our country and we're not alone? The architects, landscape architects, new urbanists, everyone's asking the same question, what's next and what do we do about it? And so I'm going to share you some of the issues which I have a concern about the planning profession, then I'll move into the demographics in a second. Number one, I believe those of us who are concerned about planning and about cities have lost our purpose, our sense of purpose. That our purpose as we look to the future is that we are essentially guardians of the future. We think about what's going to happen years ahead so we can plan for that future. Planners should be protecting the public interest, the public health, safety and welfare, and we have to address the uncertainty about the future. So I need to know that I'm looking forward to your children and grandchildren having a safe environment. Planners should also have a special concern for the long-term consequences of present actions. That's part of our code of ethics. And that's very difficult to do sometimes because my counsel wants to make a proposal, and I know that there are consequences to that decision. And I am sometimes sweating underneath my arms through my jacket because I know this is something they want to do, but I have an ethical obligation to tell them there are consequences for that decision. And that's something that I have to do. But guess what? There are also consequences for making no decision and no action. In fact, I see that more of a tragedy across the country where people say, I don't believe you, I'm going to deny it, I'm going to put my head in the sand. There are consequences for saying no and taking no action. And that is a concern that I see, whether it's for this region or any region in the country. When you say no to something, there are consequences, and you have to have a conversation about what that is. And when we work with residents in our community, and they say no to something, the question is, they're saying yes to something else. What are you saying yes to? It's easy to say no. In our community, I told the residents, when you say no to multi-housing, what you're saying is, yes, seniors and young people, we don't want you in our community. Is that what you're really saying? And so we were able to have a conversation when you say no, because that's a very popular term in the planning movement, as you all know. you're saying yes to something else, and you have to find out what they're saying yes to. Now, before we go further, I do want to say, just for the planners in the room, that in December 2009, U.S. News and World Report named planning as one of the top 50 professions in 2010. I have no idea what they said in 2011 or 2012, but in 2010, we were a hot profession. But the reason why this became important, because they also see the world is changing. We are urbanizing a lot quicker, and as I travel the country, there are leaders and elected officials looking for people with vision, with solutions, with big ideas and courage to solve the tough problems. And you know something? Other than Rick and a few other people, I can't find those people. There are very few. The time when we need those courageous people to step up, we can't find them. And that's the period we're going through right now. And when I look at Nashville, population 609,000, land area 475 square miles, and your density is 1,265 people per square mile, I wanted you to put that size in context. So in that footprint of 475 square miles, you can fit New York City, Philadelphia, and San Francisco in your city limits of that 475 square miles. Just to give you some context, Nashville, you're big. I know it's Davidson County, but that is, Rick, you have your hands cut out for you. That is a large, large area to plan for. The density of New York City, 27,000 people per square mile. Philadelphia, 11,000. So you can see that the modern cities are low density and spread out. So this is one of the challenges that you have. But it's not just about quantity, it's about quality. And the good news for you is that you have I'm showing Raleigh because you know you are one of our competitors. And you got us beat here again. Your livability index is high, but this is important that you want to remain a quality community and very livable, so you have us there. But what I want to talk about now as we shift into demographics is that you need to understand the emerging trends and frame them for the public. And planners need to watch these trends like a stockbroker watches the market. I was so pleased to read information on NashvilleNext because you're doing that. You're having that conversation. Most communities do not do that, and they don't even know the trends that are coming. So I applaud you for taking that step. And I was even more delighted when I actually saw the pieces you're doing on equity and inclusion and your 6 goals, embracing diversity and increasing neighborhood livability. You're off to a great start, and I want to let you know that you're off to a great start, and I encourage you to keep it up and move it forward. But this is what I want to talk about tonight. The emerging challenges and trends of the 21st century. I'm not going to discuss everything on this list, but let me tell you about this list. There are items on this list that have never happened before in American history. These are brand new. So you can't Google to find the answers for these questions. It's going to require new thinking and new ideas and innovation to solve these problems. These are brand new. And I'll tell you, these are game changers for our country, and these are game changers for the entire world. And the regions and communities that aren't dealing with it will be caught by surprise, and I'll go through some of these in a second. I call this the demographic remix of the 21st century, and you'll see why in a second. Let's first start with aging households and families. First projection, by 2030, 1 in 5 Americans will be over the age of 65. And you see the numbers of those who are disabled, and that's only going to increase over time. Not only will there'll be more people over 65, but they'll be living longer. By 2050, the number of Americans over 85 will triple from 5 million to close to 20 million Americans. And it has huge implications to our healthcare system, to Social Security, to how we care for them, and I can go on and on and on. But the real one that's going to affect you in this region, even though the others will, is a number of single-person households. By 2025, single-person households will equal that of a family, and from 25 and beyond, the predominant household in America will be one person. Not a family, one person. And we'll talk about the implications in a second. And by 2050, there's going to be a whole generation that we'll be dealing with, for whatever reason, one person, not the family we're used to, one person. There's this other trend called natural decrease. And this is happening across the country. 25% of all counties are fading away. West Virginia is the worst. I'll show you that in a second. But the common thread of shrinking counties, older whites who can no longer have children, and their children are saying, I'm not staying here. I don't like the job prospects. I don't like the place. I'm going to Nashville or Austin or Raleigh or DC. I'm not staying. Now, luckily for you, it's not that bad. Everything in beige are those counties that are shrinking. So you're in pretty good shape. You probably can figure out where those counties are located, but there they are, primarily some in the central, some to the west. You want to see what a real shrinking state looks like? That's West Virginia. The only reason why, the part that's in the upper corner, this is part of Metro DC, and so people are now driving to West Virginia because they cannot afford homes in the DC market. You think that's bad? I went out to Kansas. You ready for Kansas? That's Kansas. And so there's out-and-out warfare between Kansas City, Kansas and Kansas City, Missouri. Why? For Kansas City, Kansas, this is the only metro where they have a chance to have a GDP, strong GDP and an economy is from that region. So it's speaking for itself. Those areas are shrinking. And it's something that, what I try to say is that we have to figure out in this country how to have an urban, suburban, and rural strategy. We have to figure out how to work together. We cannot pit urban against rural, which is what is happening. We have to figure out how to work together, and the region that figures it out first will be successful in the 21st century. So that's a pretty powerful map to look at. Here's another shocker. Unwed births. Back in 1960, 5 out of 100. You fast forward to 2009, 4 out of 10 children are born out of wedlock. And it's not just African Americans, it's Hispanics and whites. Across the board, for whatever reason, you see a rise of unwed births. And more than half of the mothers under 30 today are single. This is now, for you in the planning business, this is a generation of families that are different than we've known that we have to plan for the future. Very, very different. Let's look at marriage. Now, I usually go to college campuses and I'm looking at that young man, talking to that lady throughout my presentation. I say, young lady, he is not serious. How do I know? This chart tells me so. For whatever reason, that sweet spot where people got married between 25 and 34 was back in 80% in the 1960s. It's now dropped to half. So people said, don't worry about the suburbs. They're going to get married, have kids, look for good schools. Well, guess what? Only half of them are getting married. And of those half, women are saying, that's okay. I'll raise a child on my own. So things are changing in your minds because it's important that planning is about place and people. Planning is about place and people, and we have to understand who we're planning for before we can actually figure out what the place will be like. And so you can see here how things are changing. So here's another look at it this is national numbers from 1960 to 2025. Look at the shift from the 1960s in terms of households with children to where we're headed to 2025. It is changing. So if you're relying on single family homes, and you're going to keep building it, you're going to be in for a surprise. So I do hope, Nashville Metro, you have a different strategy because you are going to be confronted by these trends. So what are the implications? One, what are you going to do when a person over the age of 65 realizes they can no longer drive in an environment that relies on the automobile? In fact, the number is 600,000 people over the age of 70 stop driving every year. Now, you can drive past 70. My father did in his late 80s. We finally took his license away. We're in a parking lot in Florida. After we hit a couple of cars in the parking lot, I said, Dad, it's time. So if you've ever been to St. Cloud, Florida, and your car was hit, I apologize. It was my father. But people can drive. But we're starting to ask them, what are you going to do when you can no longer drive? Well, I'm going to rely on my friend. Wait a minute, the friend was going to rely on you. And we realized that it's a big issue. In fact, Atlanta is number 1 in the nation. In just 2 years, 2015, this is a report by Tea for America, 90% of seniors over the age of 65 have poor transit access. That, ladies and gentlemen, is a lack of poor planning. That is when a region says, don't tell me what to do. I'm my own county, my own town. I'm going to do what I want to do. And that's what happened in Atlanta. And now they have a regional mess. You cannot plan your way out of that in 2 years. They tried to pass a transportation bond, it failed, and now look what's happening to their ability to attract jobs in their region. They said, don't tell me what to do. Regional planning, I will do, don't you tell me what to do. I'll do my own thing. And this is a result. Now, the good news is Atlanta is now leading one of the regions in what they call life cycle housing and aging in place. And I think they realize what's coming. But guess what? Nashville, like Raleigh, Durham, in terms of mid-sized metros, you're in the top 5. You're in the top 5. Now, the good news for us, we identified this early. We have a plan in place, and you'll see that later. And so now, we let this, again, I talked about the uncertainty about the future. We're now looking after our seniors, and we have a plan in place to deal with these issues. The other issue, planners, this is exciting. The older people get, the more NIMBY they become. Isn't that exciting? So when you have all these new creative policies, what you're going to hear is no, 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 and no again. These are one of the challenges that we have to deal with. The tax base for local governments may be challenged because in North Carolina, if you're old enough and you income qualify, your taxes remain flat. And so you can rely on the younger generation for the tax base. And what we're seeing right now is that over time, there's now a consolidation, mutual aid, and there have been over 472 local governments in the US that no longer exist. They disappeared. And we have 89,000 local governments in the US. So if you have this policy, particularly if you're an area that has, just watch your tax base and watch your senior population. So, other implications, seniors and young generation will demand urban lifestyle, different choices, smaller homes, preference to rent rather than own. And this is the one that is freaking everybody out, is that the experts are now estimating there'll be in excess of 25 million single-family homes by 2030 with nobody to buy them because the buyer, a single person, is not seeing the inventory a single-family home that they want to buy. Would a woman at the age of 29 drive 10 miles to buy a 4,000 square foot home? And so everyone's asking their question, what do we do? I know people want to get on their phones, honey, it's time to sell, 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 don't worry. You have till 2020s, but there are a lot of people thinking about what's going to happen. But this is something you definitely want to keep an eye on. In fact, this just, so the other issue is the resiliency of post-war construction. This is a big question. Pre-war, you know that, built solid as a rock. You hit your hand on the wall, you'll break your hand. Post-war construction, you know as well as I do, you put your fist through the wall, you can go through 2 walls. Mass-produced, built it quickly. This is no offense to the home builders. They built the product that were provided by them. But my question to you is, of the suburbs built in the 1980s and 90s and beyond, what happens when it turns 50? And now we're seeing this reverse migration where people are now moving from the inner city out to the outlying areas where home prices aren't appreciating as quickly as in the inner city. And they're going to be, I'm sorry, that was a surprise. I'm sorry. Surprise! What happens when that housing stock hits 50? And this is the big question we're asking ourselves. This all gets rolled into socioeconomics and housing condition. In fact, just came out yesterday. I got all these calls from council. This is what's happening in our market. Didn't even know until the report came out from a smart reporter. So we now have a California billionaire is now buying all these homes. We have 7% vacancy rate for rentals. And you know people are freaking out. We don't know, will this happen in your market? Is it happening now? So these are some of the trends that we're watching to see what is happening. And so it's interesting that we see home sizes are for the first time shrinking again. What the realtors tell me is people are now saying, listen carefully, people now are asking for smaller homes with lots of big rooms. I'm serious, that's what they're saying. And so the question is, going forward, in order to help with the building construction, the next generation of housing I talked about, since all of the consumers are saying they want more energy efficient homes and smaller homes, can we exchange quality for size as we move forward to the future? So now let's talk about race and ethnicity, and if you don't know this, by 2042, now they're saying 2043, for the first time in American history, there'll be no majority race over 50%. You can see the drop in the white population from 66 to 46%, doubling of the Hispanic population, and basically the Hispanic and Asian population, and other populations basically almost remaining even. And so the big loss, no surprise, but the Hispanic population expected to triple from roughly 47 million to 133 million between 2008 and 2050. I want to be clear, that number has nothing to do with immigration. You can put up all the walls, the dogs, the shotguns, the nuclear missiles. It will not stop it. This is the fertility rate. This is the fertility rate of Hispanic women coupled with the drop in the fertility rate of the white population, non-Hispanic. So that is what is causing it. In fact, this was the first year there was net zero migration. And so this is something that we have to recognize going forward. Also, I believe there'll be a rise in the inclusive community. By 2023, minorities will comprise of more than half of all children in the U.S., and by 2050, the nation's population of children will be 62%. This is where we're headed as a country. And a lot of people are having difficult times with these numbers. This is courtesy of PolicyLink. You can go on their website to find out more information. I'm going to show you a time lapse of the United States between 1980 and 2040. You can pay attention to Tennessee if you want, but you can just see what's going to happen. The lighter the color, that is 30%, darker the color, greater than 50%. So here's 1980, 1990, 2000, 2010. I'll stop because that's roughly where we are today. Here's 2020, 2030, and then 2040. Isn't that exciting? I get the same reaction wherever I go. So that's where we're headed as a country. Some people say, fine, great. Other people are reading between the lines what this means for them, and we're starting to see this play out in local and national politics. In fact, here's another chart provided by PolicyLink that shows you dramatic change in our population by 2042. This is going to happen. It's starting to happen already. We have now 5 minority-majority states: California, Texas, New Mexico, Hawaii, and the District of Columbia. And we'll see more crossover by 2020. Interesting map. This is a map of foreign-born. It's kind of hard to see, but basically in 1910, 96% of our foreign-born came from Europe and Canada. Today, it is now 85% from Africa, Asia, South America. This was a number from Europe. This is where it is today. And then here are all the nationalities. I always like to point out, there's Mexico, just a small number compared to all the others. But the point is that we are now seeing a huge change in our immigrant population. And then here you can see the foreign-born in our region. I thought Nashville would be higher, but you're around 12%. We're about 14%. When we look at the ethnicity of the city, I was quite surprised that Nashville and Raleigh have some similarities. When people saw those signs, they freaked out. I said, Raleigh, it's already happened. And there's no riots on the street. We're 53% white. We all get along. Great community, great schools, great quality of life. Named one of the best communities to live in. So when people fill in the blank, I told them it's already happened in Raleigh. And for the most part, it's just about happened in Nashville as well. So you're there, and the fact that things aren't going crazy shows that you are doing a great job adapting to diversity, and you didn't even know it happened. And it's happened. So congratulations, Nashville. You've gone through the first test, and you've done well. But things will change even further, and you can see how you are diverse compared to the state of Tennessee. And so, of course, I'm sure that the rest of the state looks at you a little differently than the rest of the state because you are different and special. So congratulations. Now, this is what happened in Raleigh back in 2010. Personally, I would have used another title, but you know, white's outnumbered. I kind of wouldn't have used that title. You know reporters, but they got attention. But the implications that clearly neighborhoods are going to become more diverse. School diversity policies will be an interesting debate to watch because in the U.S., schools and race are almost synonymous. But the 2020 will really be a wake-up call. Actually, 2012 was a wake-up call, but I think 2020 will be a wake-up call. And then I will predict now that the election cycles for 2020 through 24 will be interesting to watch because whoever wins the 2020 election, as we see the demographics changing, get to redraw the lines for the next 10 years. So I guarantee you that'll be an interesting time. This will continue with us, unfortunately, for about another decade. Sorry. Education, labor. We're now seeing changes in the working age population that is starting to shrink. And if you look at the bottom number, 50% minority in 2039. And our concern is we won't have enough workers to take care of us when we get old. This is now becoming a bit of an issue. The other issue is low educational attainment rate for African Americans and Hispanics. So my challenge is, for the United States, is how can we compete in a global economy of those who we have to rely on to be competitive in the 21st century, for mathematicians and lawyers and leaders, are now at the bottom of the educational system. How patriotic are we if we want to be competitive in a 21st century economy? Secondly, we may have to reverse our immigration policy. That conversation is starting right now, because we literally will not have enough workers to take care of us when we get older. And so certainly an attitude about race and ethnicity will determine how successful we are in the 21st century. Now, I don't just look at diversity in terms of race, I look at it in terms of generation. Everybody in this room is going to be on this list. If you're not, you're dead. So I know for certain you're all on this list. So let's go through these one by one. I'm going to generalize, so don't take any of this personally. I just need to explain just some of the product types. Let's start first. The reason why I talk about this is that this determines the generations, your values, needs, and aspirations. And each generation has their own. And it determines their consumer preferences and market demand. And they're all different. Not every generation thinks the same way. The analogy I like to use is, how many people ever owned a Polaroid camera or seen a Polaroid camera? How many people still use a Polaroid camera? You have one? Okay. Here's the problem. We are still building Polaroid cameras for a digital camera generation. That's the disconnect. And that's something that we're going to talk about. So let's go through it. The first one is my father. There's a picture of him when he entered into World War II. He fought in World War II, lived through the Great Depression. Not the Great Recession, the Great Depression. He understood what it was to save. My father had a credit card. Every time it came in, he paid it off. They understood what savings meant. I lived on hand-me-downs. My brother, unfortunately, was 6'4". All my clothes used to hang off my body. But I had hand-me-downs. But this is what defined my father's generation. And there aren't many of them left. About 1.5% of our population. Thomas Friedman put it in his book. That generation gave their today for our tomorrow. And there hasn't been a generation that has come close to the greatest generation. I mean, just think about that. They gave their today for our tomorrow. Then we move into the silent, chosen, Eisenhower mature. This generation has a lot of names. Interesting generation. They grew up during the suburbanization of America, when all of a sudden you left downtown or left the central city and you got a piece of earth that you can defend. The traditional home, the highway, the suburbanization of our country. This is where traditional families came from. And so I don't blame anyone from this generation that doesn't understand urban, because it was not part of their lifestyle. Many of them are elected officials and decision makers, and many of them are enlightened, but it's a different context of what we mean by development of our community. So this comes from this generation. Also understood the value of savings, and it was very different than what we see today. Then we come to the coolest, edgiest, most incredible generation on the face of the planet, the baby boomers, or what I like to call the immortals. We are going to make growing old look so cool. But here we are, the greatest explosion of prosperity ever in our country, the CEOs and leaders of today for the most part. But something happened where previous generations would save before they bought. Unfortunately, as boomers, we learned what borrowing was all about, and boy, did we fall in love, because we wanted it right now. And so while we could say a lot of great things about the boomer generation, when my father's generation gave their today for our tomorrow, sorry boomers, we're learning, but we started giving away your tomorrow for our today. And that's the debate we're having right now in this country. So we've got to understand, we talk about diversity, it's not just this thing about race and ethnicity, it's about this as well. And that's where we are today. Then we have the Gen X generation. Oh, any Gen X's in the room? How many Gen X's have more than 3 siblings? 1, 2, yeah, not many. Yeah, Gen Xers, had a lot of brothers and sisters. This was interesting because the traditional family really started to change during this period. Women started working, divorce rates started to rise. For the first time, you heard of a latchkey kid and daycare centers. Those didn't exist when I grew up. My grandmother took care of me. But today you had things change. And so you have these informal marriages, stepbrother, stepfather, stepdog, stepcat. All these weird arrangements came up through the Gen X generation. But what I like about Gen X, and I think because they spent all their time with their imaginary friends, because they didn't have many brothers and sisters, they're what Richard Florida calls the cutting edge of the creative class. So that's you, Gen X. Then why do we call the Gen Y generation Gen Y? Anybody know? You didn't see that picture? Okay. I didn't know we had like a minor in the room. All right, Gen Y, I'm going to have fun with you in a second, but let me tell you why I play around. The millennials, echo boomers, there's 80 million of these people walking the planet. You know them because they want to be CEO, director, or head of a company after 1 year on the job. Am I right? That's all it takes, 1 year. Promote me. And they want choice. When I grew up, I asked my mom what was for breakfast. She told me pancakes. My wife goes to my little 15-year-old and said, Mom, what's for breakfast? She'll say, we have cereal, eggs, toast. She goes on and on. When I grew up, I had two choices. Either I ate or I didn't eat. My daughter, the full menu. But guess what? They've now grown up. They don't just want choice, they demand choice. Did you ever hear the term transportation options? Housing choices? It's now infected our whole system. Don't you dare tell me what to do. I want choice. The other thing I like about this generation, they're trophy kids. Nobody wins, and everybody wins, no one loses. You came in last, that's okay because you showed up. Give her a prize. And but this is why I'm joking around. We have never seen a generation that volunteers more than the millennials. Never have. In about 40 years. They will volunteer for you on one condition. It's got to have a purpose. No purpose, they won't. And this is what I like about how God works. We now have the most purpose-filled generation to deal with those emerging issues I share with you, because Gen Y, it's going to happen under your watch. Gen X, yours too. And so I feel better because this generation is more racially and culturally tolerant than previous generations. And even though people are freaked out about where we're headed by 2042, I'm feeling okay because that's who's going to be in leadership at that time. So I'm feeling a lot better. Older generations struggle, younger generation will be okay. They prefer the urban lifestyle, they're environmentally conscious, place matters, not job. They actually moved to a city without a job. Who does that? 2 people, I mean, what? So they're freaking out the way we plan about place. And they look to see how tolerant you are and culturally acceptable to diversity. And you want to keep these knowledge workers in your community. We go to Gen Z, can't say much about them, a lot of similarities to the Gen Y generation, so you're going to be dealing with these issues for yet another generation. So that's why I'm saying that diversity to this group is very important. Implications, we're going to see this incredible tug of war as the older generations exit stage left and X and Y move into leadership position. And you're seeing that clash of values happening right now in our country. That's what's going on. It's a clash of values, the same thing that happened back in the 60s and the 70s. So I call this the XYZ factor. What I did was take a profile of your different generations. Nashville, not looking too bad. Raleigh's about 71%. This is your entire population, 46 and below. And Nashville, you're about 66%. This is why I put up this slide. Here's the question. Since most of your population, 66%, is 46 and below, and most of the time your elected officials are up here, can these leaders give up their today for their tomorrow? I don't know the answer in Nashville, but most places I travel, the answer is no. No. As we plan for the future, I want you to live the way I know how you should live, even though I may either be living here, I may be moving to heaven or another community over the next 20 or 30 years. And this is a struggle. This is a conversation you need to have, Nashville. What do you do? What we did in our market is that we realized in our public meetings, the younger generation won't go to you. You have to go to them. They won't. They will not come to you. And so we use all sorts of methods to reach out to this generation. And as a result, we were able, when we heard the no's, we brought the younger generation in, we started hearing the yeses. And then we even invited the children because it's part of their future. So as I move into a couple of case studies, we always talk about the environment, the economy, and equity. Most people forget about equity and just pursue these two. If you're not pursuing equity, you're not being sustainable. Keeping track of time here. And so I'm going to skip this one for the sake of time, because I want to make sure I get these other points. When we talk about diversity, I want to make sure what diversity is not. Diversity is not meeting EEOC requirements or hiring a minority to meet the goals to secure a contract or to make sure there's someone on your staff. That's not, in my opinion, what diversity is. What is diversity? It's the value of different perspectives, pure and simple. It's listening to those voices. It's working with different cultures, race, income, disability, and I can go on and on. It's exactly what you're doing. It adds value to decision making. You start to hear those stories like we heard before I spoke. It is our responsibility as planners, and Nashville is your future. You have to have this conversation. You cannot put your head in the sand, because if you say no and don't want to deal with it, it'll happen. And now you won't be managing it, you'll be reacting to it. So this is something you certainly have to deal with. What are some other cities that have dealt with it? One is Washington, D.C., where I worked. I gave Rick Bernhardt a copy of this report. The city decided that they wanted to have a vision for growing an inclusive community. And so their comp plan, this was their frame, they put this forward. Unfortunately, leadership changed, and they were not able to implement this, in my opinion, to its full ability. But luckily in Raleigh, we were able to do this. This is our comprehensive plan, passed in 2009. And as you can see there, our top priority was economic prosperity and equity, because we want to make sure everybody benefited in all communities, all races, all ethnicities. That is in our plan as one of our organizing themes. And then we came up with this growth framework map I shared with you earlier. We now are channeling all our growth into 8 centers and 12 corridors, so seniors have an opportunity to live. We have opportunities for people to have access to jobs and housing, and now we passed a code to make sure that this happens. And then here is the targeted areas where we're going to focus our attention, where it has a high return on investment, and our minority communities happen to be centered basically on this side of town. And we're focusing our efforts to make sure that we're able to deal with it. But we're also focused on neighborhood restoration and not revitalization, because some of these communities need to be healed. It's not just revitalizing communities, it's revitalizing and restoring souls and promises made that weren't kept, of years of urban renewal and gentrification and displacement. It's not easy. And so we focus more on neighborhood restoration and not neighborhood revitalization, because it's deeper than just buildings. It's about memories of place that no longer exist. And so we're now taking a whole new approach on focusing on restoration and not just revitalization. We did pass our code on last Monday, and so now we have the tools in place to start building that city and providing those opportunities. I'm now going to shift on something which I have near and dear to my heart, and it's called return on investment on how we plan for growth, which will make you economically a stronger city going forward. The example we use, and I'll be back May 1st, right, Bridget, to talk more about this if you want to see this again in the future. We got tired of people saying all you do is pay attention to downtown. So we said, I want to be clear. It would take 650 homes on 150 acres to equal the tax value of one of our high rises downtown. 90 times the tax value. So we told our residents, if you support this and not that, what you're really saying is, raise my property taxes. I'll carry the tax load. We said there's got to be a better way. And we looked at the downtown versus suburban, found out downtown pays off its infrastructure. In 3 years, return on investment, 35%. Suburban, 42 years, return on investment, 2%. And you ask which one you support if you were smart, but time after time after time, elected officials choose this way. And then they basically give your tomorrow for their today and get the development, and then we're left with paying for 42 years to get our return on investment. Another example, a colleague of mine, Joe Minicosi, put it very simply. in Asheville and downtown. This one on 34 acres, half acre. Real estate taxes, $6,500, 10 times the tax value. But jobs, because it's important to grow your community. Walmart produces 6 jobs per acre, the downtown almost 74. So as you plan your 475 square miles, and you want to be equitable and have everyone be prosperous, you have to think of a different way to plan. So we did this in Raleigh to see what is our value per acre, and the darker the color blue, the higher the value. I couldn't see it, so I asked my staff, can you put this in 3 dimensions? And they did. What do you think downtown is? I mean, this downtown is paying probably about a third of the city, and that's our midtown. And so it's resetting the entire way we plan, because we want to have that economic prosperity and equity for all, and this is one of the approaches we're using to get to it. And so right now, we're going to focus on rezoning all of this in our city to increase the land value, so we can now work with developers and figure out a way to buy land to start doing some of the things we want to do to share that economic prosperity and equity for our residents. I don't have time to get into this, but I do want to talk about memory of place. I share that with you already. We're now involved in placemaking because people want the experience of place. Even if it's, regardless of the socioeconomic level, people still deserve places. We're now teaming that up to show that if you do development right, you actually can have an incredible return on investment, which makes you a stronger and healthier city. As a result, we're one of the lowest tax places in North Carolina, and I think we actually moved up to the #1 slot because we want to be smart, efficient, and understand how we can pass on the economic prosperity and equity for all of our residents. Just to let you know, top priorities for planners, this came from the citizens. They rated what planners should be working on. They put job creation, safety, and schools. Just want to remind you, schools is economic development. Let me repeat that. Schools is economic development. And so I actually agree with the public about this list. So as I close, right on time, who will address these emerging trends? I'm so glad you actually put this in front of you as one of the strong pillars of your comprehensive plan. So I think you answered this question, is that all of you? Can we give our today for the next generations tomorrow? And that's going to be the conversation that you're going to have during this whole NashvilleNext conversation. And this is a tough one because you're going to hear a lot of no's over the next year. You're going to hear no many, many times. But I encourage you, ask the question, if you're saying no, what are you saying yes to? Remember, there are consequences for present actions, but also saying no has consequences, and please make sure you have those conversations in your public meetings. Can we embrace the different values, attitudes, voices, and traditions as we plan a future? You started that effort. I hope at the end, the answer will be yes. America is changing, and smart places understand their sense of urgency 10 years before it's urgent. And all I can say is, Nashville, I know you're smart. Thank you very much. As I told you, I freaked some people out, and we had about 5 people left, so mission accomplished.
Now we get to freak you out with questions. So if you had a question for Mr. Silver, please write it on the card and hand them to the planning staff who are coming around to pick them up. And while the cards are coming forward, I'm going to start with my own question. It's the privilege of having the microphone. So Nashville has a very proud history of social justice entrepreneurs. We had a group of college students called the Children who came up with a little thing called nonviolent protest and the sit-in movement of the civil rights movement.
Right.
And I'm so sorry.
I'll stand here.
Thank you. This is awkward. Here we go. So Nashville is built on a great history of social justice entrepreneurs who came up with things like the civil rights movement sit-ins and have carried that legacy to today. What is the role of human rights organizations, social justice organizations, and social justice entrepreneurs like the Children and others in a planning process like this one?
Oh, I have the microphone here. Got it. One is just be part of the conversation. I can't make it any easier than that. Very often, they're not even asked to be part of a planning process, or when they do, it may be at the tail end when they're reacting rather than participating in. But they have some value to add about their experiences, and from my point of view, that they should be there at the beginning of the conversation. They should certainly participate because they have stories to tell, they have experiences they want to share, and who knows, many cities right now, the fastest growth we're seeing across the board is actually businesses created by immigrant populations. And so there's a lot of value that can be added, and so what I would say is just make sure that they're in there at the beginning of the process and not toward the tail end where they seem like they're more reacting than contributing and shaping the conversation.
Thank you. Question from the audience. What are the challenges in developing public transit in the context of changing demographics?
Well, whether it's changing demographics or not, the challenge is when you build a transit system which tends to be regional, there are many people that do not see the value or see it at that it's wasteful spending. And that's something, regardless of your changing demographics, you're going to have to deal with. From my perspective, you have to make your case that you have to pay for roads. And there are some roads, some of you use roads there are some roads in this region you've never used, yet you paid for them. Am I right? Some of you have used roads, have never used roads that you paid for. The same thing was transit. You collectively put into a public benefit that basically you could all share in, but that's a very difficult argument to make. But for changing demographics, particularly for the aging, you do not want people to be isolated. You cannot paratransit your way out of it. So if you want to be competitive in the 21st century, you do need a transit system, whether it's bus, light rail, streetcar, and you need a way of people getting access to jobs. So in my opinion, transportation network is vital to be competitive in the 21st century, but from an equity point of view, you want to be fair and make sure people have access to goods, services, and jobs.
Let's see. How do you incentivize urban restoration?
I mean, our approach is that we work with the market and increase the density of zoning. And because I have a difficult time with the word incentivize, it's the most popular word used in local government, and almost everything is incentivized. If you incentivize everything, you incentivize nothing, because what do I choose as an incentive if I have 10 choices? So to me, I would say that our approach is that we focus on increasing the value of the land, which from our perspective would make a developer more likely, increases their value, increases their equity, and then most likely we'd see some redevelopment. But that is very, very difficult. The other option is the city will buy land. We'll then issue an RFP to get someone redeveloped. But in our city, we don't touch tax increment financing. So we use zoning, we use parking to incentivize it. But we try to avoid the term incentivize, because far too often we try to incentivize green, we try to incentivize low-income tax development, affordable housing. You do all these things, and the bottom line is the public's confused. If you incentivize everything, you incentivize nothing. But those are some of the approaches that we use.
So this is a question about incentivizing green.
Point made.
How do you work issues and the consequences of climate change into your planning?
I'm not sure we do that directly. I think that part of our goal is certainly we have a green print, which is number one. We have a blueprint for growth. We also have a green print for growth. So we have our greenway system, we have our park system, which is one way we try to add to the environment. Number two, with our proposed transit system, we're trying to reduce greenhouse gases. We pursue LEED and D silver for all of our buildings. And so there's an overall strategy in our plan where we try to actually address climate change in the small way we can. We're putting more renewables on our buildings, that's solar. I don't think we've touched wind yet, but solar. We have plug-in vehicles throughout our downtown infrastructure. So we're taking those small measures to actually be greener, but it's not something we incentivize. We actually do a lot of that on our own, including we have now a requirement for bike racks in all parking decks. Do you have that?
I don't know.
Yeah, we now have a requirement for bike racks in parking decks that goes into effect September 1st. That's going to be really cool.
All I know is we have cool new red bicycles all
okay.
around our downtown. You've touched on this a little bit with your discussion about the aging population, but how does planning take into consideration all people with disabilities, not just the aging and elderly?
Well, ADA, for the most part, the ADA requirements forces us to pay attention to it. We're looking at universal housing. We're looking at making sure sidewalks are accessible, our sidewalks are repaired. We're actually taking the effort where rather than assessing the adjacent property owner to build a sidewalk, we're now asking our taxpayers to pass a bond to build the sidewalks. And so we're doing that little by little because we want to make sure people have access and mobility throughout our city. But in terms of all the standard things, we follow all the ADA compliance, we're pursuing universal design, and so beyond that, that's how we're trying to pursue those issues of disabilities. And even now, more of our street crossings have the chirping lights, so when people are hearing impaired, they don't have to be afraid to walk in our downtown.
This one is marked as a kid question, but I think we'd all ask it. Do you think your plan will work?
It is working. It's working already. All the areas we predicted we would see growth, we're seeing it as if I told them to do it myself. We actually have accountability meetings with our council every year to show how we're implementing the plan. So the plan is being implemented, 2009. The public loves it. We actually quote it on a regular basis. We actually see it being implemented right before our very eyes. So far, since 2009, the plan is working.
Okay. So if nobody's having children and living alone in single
having
person
children.
households, how is it that we are growing at such a fast rate?
No, we're still growing. No, we're growing not at a fast rate. We're actually, our growth rate actually has dropped. So people are still having children. They're just not having as many children. And the women childbearing years is shrinking relative to the population. So we're still growing, but we're just not growing at the faster rate, and our birth rate is dropping. People are just having less children. So we're going to grow. We're not just going to grow as fast. And in your market, people are migrating here. So your growth consists of in-migration and births. So if you look at the metro of Nashville, you usually cancel out deaths, but you look at the net between deaths, birth, and then migration, and that's where your growth is coming from.
How does healthcare reform and personal accountability, for example, healthcare management on the aging individual, affect long-term planning development?
I have no idea. Sorry who asked that question. I really don't. I have no idea.
And are the projected trends around marriage and childbirth necessarily a bad thing?
I didn't say it was bad. I just said it's an implication we have to deal with. I don't know what's going on. It could happen 10 years from now. The trend could reverse. 10 years from now, millennials may decide to move to the suburbs. So I don't have a crystal ball. I can only tell you the trends of what's happening right now. But for the time being, people are deciding not to get married, or they're pushing off marriage to a later age. I just had numbers from 25 to 34. It could be very likely that a woman wants to have a career first, be established, then get married and have a child. So all these trends, again, could change at any given time. It's always hard to tell, always.
In your talks around the country,
Yes.
How often do you encounter people who have their heads in the sand, or are people receptive to your ideas in settings like this?
Most of the people who come here and speak, I think, are interested, but I can tell you, I would say, sadly, most of them are in a state of denial and rather not deal with it, or don't even come to the meeting, because a lot of people said, oh, I wish I brought my city council, oh, I wish I brought the planning commission, because they need to hear this. But I still think it's a struggle that most people either don't want to deal with it, prefer to say no, say it's not happening, and unfortunately, that's the sad reality, that most people are in denial and prefer to say no than deal with these issues.
This is going to be our last question.
I know, this is like rapid fire.
I know.
Bang, 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 bang.
I know, it's the speed round. With the return on investment being best in urban Nashville, where does this leave the suburbs or suburban Nashvillians in the plan?
You can focus on corridors and centers. We'll have a better return on investment, but what it's just showing you is that as you start to pick, because again, you have a large area, 475 square miles, is that we're just using it to where to make strategic investment of taxpayer dollars. So if you pick growth centers, even if we showed you Midtown and some of the outlying areas, it does have a better ROI. Downtown is the best, Midtown is next. but you definitely want to pick compact development where infrastructure exists, and that's what you get your better ROI. But as you plan, I'm sure, Rick, and you have Bill Fulton coming here, I think in a couple of weeks, or a couple of months, I'm not sure. He'll share with you a lot more what's happening nationally on this whole issue of ROI, but you can still do development, it's just you won't have as good a return on investment as you will in the downtown location. Doesn't mean you can't do development there, but just don't expect a strong ROI unless it's going to be more compact or a longer corridor.
Congratulations, you've won. Thank you so much to Mitch Silver.
All right, thank you.
And thank you all for taking time to join the Nashville Next Speaker Series and for your commitment to our city. As we said at the beginning, the speaker series will continue in 2 weeks with Dr. Henry Cisneros, who will be joining us for a speech titled Modern Cities as Engines of Economic Development and Social Progress. And that will be on Monday, March 11th at 5:30 at the Nashville Children's Theater. And if you are interested in more of these events, there's a brochure listing the entire speaker series in the main conference room. So I said there would be more about how we're participating in this conversation through technology. There are so many ways that you can do this. Please visit NashvilleNext.net and read the background reports on equity and inclusion. Share your thoughts on Mind Mixer and click on the link to join the conversation at NashvilleNext.net. You can also text your ideas to this number up here. You can make here tonight a video of your reaction to Mr. Silver's ideas. And you can also have your picture taken with a whiteboard filling out the question, in 2040 Nashville is blank because blank. So please share your thoughts with the planning folks and with the rest of our community. And remember that tomorrow night on Nashville News Channel 5 Plus's Open Line, we'll have a continuation of this conversation. So thank you again so much for being here. Please participate in the lobby and we'll see you on March 11th.